So today I'm going to speak to Nikhil about how the Digital India Act may completely change the way internet companies operate in India. So hi Nikhil. My first question to you is why is Digital India Act so important and how will it impact companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Zomato, Swiggy, etc., etc.?
Thanks, Akshit. So the Digital India Act is like a revamp of India's IT Act, the Information Technology Act. And I'm not going to go into legalese, but one of the things to remember is that everything on the internet is IT, and how the Digital India Act works is that it regulates all of these IT companies and how they function. So whether it's Google, Facebook, Amazon, whether it is WhatsApp, whether it is Paytm, Swiggy, Zomato, all of these have a technology component. And some of these places are these companies are actually marketplaces. So one of the most important parts of the Digital India Act is going to be about how marketplaces for speech, which are like uh, the uh, Facebook, Twitter,
Okay.
YouTube, and how marketplaces for commerce, which is even payment gateways like Razorpay or payment companies like PhonePe, insurance aggregators like Policy Bazaar, um, Swiggy, Zomato, Amazon, Flipkart. All of these are going to be regulated under the Digital India Act in the same way that the IT Act regulates them.
Okay. Got it. So one of the hot topics of Digital India Act is how intermediaries will be regulated. So my first question is, what is the difference between publishers and intermediaries? And should online platforms and marketplaces be treated different from publishers or retail companies?
So these online platforms and marketplaces, right? They are a new construct, so to speak. So think about it more like a mall. Should a mall be accountable for what you sell in your shop? Obviously, they need to do some due diligence to know that you're a legitimate player and you're not a crook or something, or you're not selling drugs or guns there, right? But they can only do so much. They can't inspect every item that you're selling and go and look at your shop every day. In the same way, these marketplaces um, have this unique situation where they enable commerce or they enable speech, but they're not accountable or liable for it. So, for example, if someone says something defamatory against you or me on Twitter, you can't hold Twitter accountable for it. It can't survive that liability, basically. So
Okay.
that's how it functions, right? So these marketplaces are essentially enablers of speech, they are enablers of commerce. And if they had liability, they would never survive that kind of liability at that scale. So they deserve different treatment. Like you can't treat an Amazon the same way you would treat a retailer. You can't treat a Zomato and Swiggy the same way that you would, treat, let's say, the delivery person or just a shop that is delivering its own products. In the same way, you can't treat social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube in the same way that you would treat a publisher of content like MediaNama. So, because these are enablers of speech, they don't create the speech, they don't speak on our behalf. In the same way, like I post a YouTube video, it's not being posted by Facebook or it's not being posted by YouTube. So YouTube can't be held responsible for my speech. If it was, it will never survive that liability. If a seller on Amazon is selling a counterfeit product, it will never survive the liability of that counterfeit product because so many people could do that. So billions of videos can go up on YouTube in a single day, or billions of posts can go up on Facebook in a single day. Billions of products can be sold on online marketplaces simply because they don't have the liability for it. They have to act responsibly. That means if you point out that, hey, this is wrong, then they have to take it down, but you can't hold them liable for it.
Okay. I get your point, Nikhil. Your argument is that uh, e-commerce and a lot of internet companies deserve a treatment where they cannot be held liable for everything that is sold or written on their platform. But our Union Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar has quite the contrary views, it seems, because he has actually questioned the need for safe harbor provisions, which protects intermediaries from a lot of liabilities. So, what are your thoughts on that? So, what will happen if there is no safe harbor? If what you're saying, the kind of treatment you're saying intermediaries should get, if they don't get that, what will happen in that scenario?
So in that scenario, essentially what happens is, so let's say if you don't have safe harbor, right? Let's say, Akshit, if you are an intermediary and I'm posting on your platform, right? If you were liable for my content and someone is going to sue me for what I have said, they will sue you as well. Now, if there are a billion pieces of content up, they will be, for each of those billion pieces, a billion people will sue, right? And you'll be liable for it. So no platform can survive that liability. They have to be responsible, but they can't be liable. If there's no safe harbor, many parts of the internet will actually break down. Like, for example, API calls. So API is called like an application programmable interface, which basically allows services like, maybe Zoho or Twitter or MailChimp, etc., to allow others to build products on top of their own service. So the API is an intermediary function if you look at it, right? So what happens is new products, new innovations come out because you open it up and let anyone build. And so if there is liability for API as an example, half the software in this world would not exist. So many things that people build on top of other platforms will not exist. Multiple platforms working together to create a new product or a new experience or a new sort of ease of use will not exist. So if there is no safe harbor, uh, a lot of the marketplaces will not survive. Most of the sites will not work. Most software will not be available. Most service providers will not exist. There will be very little speech online. Everyone will have to buy a domain name, set up their own blog, and run that. And in fact, even a domain name registrar could be liable for the content on a blog. Safe harbor is critical to the internet. So basically, without this protection that these intermediaries have, the internet would not exist because the internet by itself cannot take on the liability of what everyone else is doing.
Okay. Nikhil, so we'll stay on this portion only. Rajiv Chandrasekhar has also said in his previous consultation about the Digital India Act that intermediaries may be classified into different parts in different sectors. So this talk of sectoral regulation, where e-commerce will be treated different from content might be treated different from insurance, and insurance might be treated different from news aggregators. So, what are your thoughts on this way of sectoral regulations that the government might be thinking, and what are the challenges or the good things that will come about with this approach?
So, when you look at sectoral regulation, it's already happening, right? So, I remember the insurance regulator IRDA was the first in, I think, 2011 to start regulating insurance aggregators, and that almost killed that industry. Policy Bazaar, for example, almost went down, and they had to really change their business and how they operate, and find a legal way around the regulations, basically. You have payment gateways which are also regulated. Just earlier this year, gaming intermediaries were being regulated differently. So sectoral regulations already here. It seems to be here to stay. Um, and also, different ministries don't seem to understand the intermediary function or how intermediaries are different from platforms. Even if you look at Uber and Ola, right? Different states have got different gig economy sort of regulation parameters. So Uber is being regulated differently in Delhi, differently in Bangalore. So even for gig economy, there are different types. Like cab aggregators is a category by itself. Sectoral regulation is already happening. What sectoral regulation does is that it sort of increases the burden on each individual company to adapt, um, or to change. So let's say if I start something in a domain, right? Let's say I start something in digital payments as an aggregator. Now, I will have to find a product market fit. I'll have to change, and I'll give you an old example. Right, there was a company called Ibibo, which now is a travel company called Go Ibibo, which is owned by Make My Trip. It started off as a blogging platform. Then it became a social network. Then it became like, I think, a gaming aggregator. Then it became a music aggregator. Then it became an e-commerce aggregator. So it kept changing itself because I was trying to find the right product market fit, trying to find what people would want. Um, and so it becomes tricky for platforms to, like it, for platforms that need that ability to innovate and keep changing, to figure out what is the service that they can provide that consumers really want. And sometimes it takes one feature change. So if I have to change regulations every time, I have to change how I function and go to a different regulator, go and register with a different regulator, adapt to a whole set of 1,000 guidelines for each different regulator. The more the regulation there is sectorally, the more complicated, the more costly, the more difficult it will become for someone to evolve its product. And that could mean that there are less new products coming out because the cost of changing the product is going to be so high. And startups almost don't have more than 1 month or 2 months of money in the earlier stages. And maximum they run with is about 6 months of money, right? So the cost of changing is very, very high. And so sectoral regulation creates that problem. The idea, I think, would be that if there are certain critical sectors that need to be regulated differently, have sectoral regulation for those, have regulators regulate those separately, but make sure the regulators are largely light touch. Because the more stringent the regulations, like it's on payment gateways, the less innovation there will be. Everything, little thing, you'll have to go to the regulator for approval. And that approval process has a cost attached to it. There's a money cost attached to it. There's a time cost attached to it. There's an innovation cost attached to it. So you want to make sure that there's innovation in the domain. Then you have to ease up on sectoral regulation and not splice up the internet into different types of intermediaries. So otherwise you'll be left in social media with just Twitter, Facebook, Snap, and a couple of others who go and register with the Indian government. So new types of social networks and new experiences won't come about because every startup in somewhere in the world, when it's starting up, it's not going to go specifically come to India, go and create a company here, set up a nodal officer, go and get permission from the regulator to launch. They don't have that kind of money. They don't have that kind of inclination. They don't have that bandwidth. So India will then get less access to new innovations if this happens. So I'm a bit concerned about it. There are no easy answers there. There is no right approach there, but it has to be light touch until something is, if it's a high risk thing, or if something becomes a high risk thing, then regulators need to be in a position to jump in and say, hey, this needs to be regulated. Or if they can identify a few categories which are critical and high risk, then you regulate them. Then you're left with only those players. In social media, for example, I'm not in favor of sectoral regulation simply because there is so much that is possible in social media. The other complication sectoral regulation creates is that, sometimes you have to work with multiple regulators. So, for example, if you are a social commerce entity, how will you work? Right? So social commerce, will it be an e-commerce regulator? Will it be a social media regulator? Will the government regulate it as a social media company? Will it regulate it as an e-commerce company? There are functional differences. Take WeChat, for example. WeChat has taxi booking also. It has e-commerce as well. It has messaging as well. Even today, when you look at Paytm app, the Paytm app, Paytm has so many services inbuilt into it. So Paytm will have to register with every single regulator. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so as I understand from your points, sectoral regulations could put a lot of compliance burden, and it could be hard to classify companies into particular sectors. Two major points I think I got from your answer. So before we end this, I have one last question for you. Should active intermediaries be treated differently from mere conduits? And what should be the criteria for determining active intermediaries and passive intermediaries? How would you differentiate between them?
So, I mean, I frankly, this is a really tricky one because, um, there was a High Court judgment in the Delhi High Court where the judge basically said that these are 26 or 27 criteria that this e-commerce company that was allegedly selling fake Louboutin shoes was doing. So it was sourcing the product, selecting the seller, maybe doing photographs, holding the product, collecting the payments, doing promotion for the product, uh, delivering the products, right? So they were doing 27 different things, and they said that, if it's doing all of these things that a retailer does, then why is it an intermediary? So an intermediary idea is that, you're just taking things from one side and giving it to another. So it's like an ISP. An ISP, when you're accessing the internet, is putting your request to a website to give you data, and the website gives you data. In social media platforms or in a messaging platform, if I'm sending you a message, WhatsApp is not reading the message, WhatsApp is not editing the message, it's not modifying the message. It has no involvement apart from taking your message and giving it to me. So, those are conduits. But with time, what has happened in safe harbor and with intermediary liability regulation is that with the way how these platforms work is that they've started doing little things, and some of them are useful. So, for example, in e-commerce, back in 2004, 5, 6, there were two, three e-commerce sites or four, five e-commerce sites in the country in India, but they were very difficult to uh, order from because A, payments weren't that easy. B, and I know this from a personal example, if you ordered something, you don't know if you actually, what you will get is exactly what you've ordered. So, that was a problem, that you wouldn't get what you've ordered. Um, so, but then in a mere conduit, there's a buyer and a seller. The platform does nothing. So what happened was that when Flipkart came in, they started controlling those aspects. So if you were buying a book, they would make sure the right book is delivered. If you're buying a phone, they built in process to make sure the right phone was being delivered. So they even started holding inventory. They started taking control of the delivery. Payments obviously were in their control. So the more active platforms are, the better the consumer experience. But at the same time, the more active the platforms are, the more they're acting like a retailer rather than an intermediary. And the ability of these platforms to actually control what gets done, what doesn't get done on the platform is also there. So, if someone hasn't put up a photo, they can basically ban a seller, right? If they haven't put up a photo. In the same way, on social media platforms, they can take down content as they want. Trump's account got banned. So that's an action from them, right? Sometimes there's something called shadow banning where certain words or certain commentary is actually banned and not shown to users. So there's an active participation. So wherever there's active participation, the problem is that maybe the platform works better, or maybe there's a political bias, but it's not a neutral platform, right? Even in commerce, it's not a neutral platform. They might be preferencing their product versus someone else's. So that's an active intermediary, whereas a passive is just idhar se lekar udhar dena, just take it from you and give it to me kind of a situation. Um, how they should be regulated, I honestly don't know. But my sense is that we need to keep this definition of intermediary intact, um, because it helps serve consumers better, because it allows founders to innovate more. So the more uh, exercising of control you allow founders without putting more regulatory burden on them, uh, with the intention that they want to build great products, it will work. There'll be more innovation that happens. And we need to, if we shut this down too quickly, you'll only be left with a few players in the market. So on this active versus passive, I don't think the law should distinguish between active and passive. Um, and the safe harbor protection should basically apply as Vasudev from the Center for Communications Governance at the National University in Delhi said at our MediaNama discussion last week. The safe harbor protections should apply to third-party content. And if you have due diligence requirements that you need to maybe register an office in Delhi, maybe in India, maybe you need to display your address and your phone number and your office number, and you need to abide by certain rules and conditions. Those should be separate. Third party content should be treated separately. I mean, that's the only way to deal with intermediary regulation. I thought Vasu's point was very well made. It showed a lot of clarity, and for me that perspective was new, so I found it really impressive. um, of course, there is no easy answer to these questions about intermediate regulations. Today, at the Digital India Act discussion in Mumbai, Rajiv Chandrasekhar again asked about, shouldn't we just do away with safe harbor protections? To that, I would say a big no. uh, we need to have safe harbor protections because the internet will not survive without it.
Thank you, Nikhil, for explaining these complex topics in simple words. Thank you. Appreciate your time.